And when you think about the height of passion that you might have, think for just a moment. You did not know all the powers that be. You did not know that there was a design plan to convict you before you had your hearing. It was already settled. And there were enough people around to convict you of something that you're innocent of. I would imagine when you find out and you experience that examination, that trial, that sentencing, I think you'd be infuriated. I know I would. That's not fair. And yet you're powerless. You're powerless to be able to overcome that in the sense that you could turn that around. Everybody seems to be against you. How do you react on those occasions? What's your character like when such injustice takes place? Jesus experienced this in his trials. And we might say, well, the trial of Jesus. In reality, there are 6 trials under the heading of the trial of Jesus. John the 18th chapter speaks about that Jesus was brought to Annas first for examination. He was the father-in-law to Caiaphas, that when Annas is through with him, examining him, sends him to Caiaphas, and Caiaphas then turns him over to the Sanhedrin. Caiaphas is the high priest then. Annas is just his father-in-law. But he had a reputation. He still had influence. Even though he had been out of the high priesthood for a while. He served until 15 AD. But he's well respected. And when the Sanhedrin got with him, that was the end of his trials. Under the heading of the trial of Jesus, we have him turned over to Pilate. And in the midst of being examined by Pilate, he hears that Jesus was from Galilee, and he turned him over to Herod. When Herod got through with him, he turned him back to Pilate. And Pilate had him scourged and then had him crucified. The cards were stacked against Jesus. And the amazing thing is that he is the Son of God who will declare that he could have 10,000 angels, countless angels, come to his aid. But he was willing to give up his life and die the cruel death of the Roman government of crucifixion. And to spend relatively a short time, 6 hours on the cross before he died. But leading up to that crucifixion, I think we can say he had 6 trials. And all of them were not good in his favor. And they were looking for a crime. They arrested him, didn't have a crime, and they're trying to find a way to legitimately kill him. Because they want to be legal, you know. And Jesus allowed that to happen. God allowed that to happen. How much money would you spend, or how much funds would you get over the internet? Help me because I have been treated unjustly. You'd have every right to do what Jesus had to endure. But he didn't do that. It's one thing to be killed by a mob, to be assassinated by a single sword. It's another thing to go through the court system 6 different times when they have no evidence worthy of death. And everybody's trying to pass the buck, but they're determined to kill him. That's what Jesus endured. I want to examine those things. What lessons can we learn from that? Because I think there's some lessons that we can learn. But when we think about Annas, Only John will talk about that incident. We speak about Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin. Matthew, Mark, Luke will speak to those events. And we'll find that Luke only talks about the incident with Herod. But you put all the synoptic gospels along with John, and you have what I'm calling the trials of Jesus, not just the trial of Jesus. What he had to endure with different men. It wasn't one assassin, it was judges, high-ranking judges, high-ranking people. And they couldn't find something worthy of death, but he was worthy of death for them. And they had him crucified. When we think about Annas, notice the charge against Jesus when he was captured in the garden. Could you tell me what charge they had for him? When all the soldiers, maybe up to 600, what were the charges? But they arrested him. And when Annas gets to see him first, there wasn't these charges back and forth. He says, what about your disciples? What about your teaching? In John 18 and verse 19. What about that? What does that have to do with anything? What does that have to do with why I'm arrested? I imagine you'd be thinking those terms. But it's interesting how Jesus reacts on this occasion when he speaks about those things. Jesus says, I've spoken openly in this world. I ever taught in your synagogues and in the temple, where all the gathering of the Jews. In secret spake I nothing. Now he spoke secretly with his apostles, but what he taught, and what he talked about with them, and an idea of maybe telling them what the parables were. He spoke openly all that he was involved in teaching. And Jesus says, why do you ask me? The confidence of Jesus as a teacher at this moment when he's being tested, not convicted, tested. He's arrested. What crime? He says, you ask them. You ask them that have heard me. They'll tell you of my teaching. But Jesus wasn't going to accommodate him. And when that happened, we find that he was there arrested, interrogated with no charges. But when he spoke that, one close by struck Jesus on the cheek. Why do you answer the high priest so? He looked at Jesus' terms and his words as being disrespectful to the authorities and to the high priest. We get to examine Jesus as a teacher. You know, he spoke in the Sermon on the Mount. Resist not him that is evil, but whosoever smiteth thee on thy right cheek, give to him the other also. I don't know which side Jesus was struck. But did he turn the other cheek on this occasion? What an opportunity to practice what you preach, Jesus. I think he was. He wasn't retaliating with evil. He wasn't idea of resisting them by retaliating with evil and fighting back. While literally not giving the other cheek to him and let him beat him some more, he got him to think. And when you get somebody to think what they're doing when they're beating you, that's good. That's good. It's good for the man that's beating you, and it's good for you. If I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if I've spoken well, meaning it is the truth and it is factual, why are you hitting me? Did he return evil for evil? No. That's what Matthew 5 is dealing with. Retaliation, being quick to retaliate. It's not the idea of defending yourself. It's that quick retaliation which we would feel at a moment like this. So much injustice is being had at the very beginning. And what Jesus does, he gets them to think and bear witness regarding truth. Isn't that what a court and trial is all about? Get to the truth. Tell me my charges. What evil have I done? If I have spoken well, why do you smite me? When that happens, he just turns him over to Caiaphas. Let's take him to the next step. Caiaphas was the son-in-law to Annas, and Caiaphas is the high priest. Remember in John 11th, he prophesied that it was expedient that one die for his nation so the whole nation won't be perishing. So he'd already prophesied about Jesus. And on this occasion, Caiaphas gets to examine him. Notice in Matthew the 26th chapter and verse 59, what indeed Caiaphas is all about and what he's searching for, what he wants to have accomplished. Now the chief priest and the whole council sought false witnesses against Jesus that they might put him to death. Can you imagine? Let's get some false witnesses. We can't get them to agree. But we'll take false witnesses because the man's got to die. What kind of trial is that under the high priest Caiaphas? Well, the man said that I'm able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days. He didn't say he's able to destroy the temple of God. That was a false witness. But he said worse to the fact that you destroy this temple in 3 days, I'll raise it up. He's talking about his body. And the high priest stood up and said unto him, Answerest thou nothing? Witness against thee? But Jesus held his peace. That's instructive too, that we'll talk about in a few moments. But they're seeking to put him to death. We need witnesses, and we don't care if they're false. That's Caiaphas. He does make him swear when Jesus is not speaking in his behalf, make him swear with an oath of the truth that he is the Christ. Matthew 26, verse 63 and 64. And that means he is the Son of God. I adjure you. That means I give you an oath. Are you the Christ, the Son of God? He speaks then. He said, Thou hast said, you have well said, because that is indeed the truth. We're a little bit before 3 o'clock in the morning, around that time, or at least before 6, when the trials are taking place. But you know you've got to get it legal. Sanhedrin was not to meet at night. There was not to be any trials at night. Who cares about the little details? When it came morning, we'll nail him. And the Sanhedrin did that. Here Caiaphas, high priest, when it gets to be morning, when it gets to be the turn of day, cock was crowing at 3 o'clock in the morning. Between 3 and 6 now, we find that he's in being tried and examined. But when morning comes, they have to make things legal. When the morning was come, Matthew 27 and verse 1, all the chief priests, the elders of the people took counsel against Jesus. He didn't take counsel. Let's think about, is this man innocent? Is this man worthy of death or not? We're the Sanhedrin. We're the ultimate court of the Jews. They took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And they bound him and led him away and delivered him to Pilate, the governor. We'll turn him over to the Gentiles. After all, he declared he's a son of God, and that's blasphemy. It's only blasphemy if it's false. And Jesus will speak that he is indeed the Son of God. But they had all they needed. They've been wanting that. And so we find that the Jewish portion of the trial, the three trials under the Jewish legend. We got what we wanted. We've got the charges now. We don't need anything else. Pilate, you got him. And so he stands before Pilate, and think about him being the king of the Jews. That's a political animal, Pilate was. And this king of the Jews thing, that's right up his alley. He wants to know about that. Are you the king of the Jews? In John 18 and verse 37. And Jesus does address Pilate. And he speaks to those things. And I want you to notice when he asked him, art thou indeed a king? Jesus answered, thou sayest that I am a king. To this end have I been born, and to this end have I come into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth, and every one that is of the truth heareth my voice. All Pilate could come back to, what is truth? His disdain for truth, frustration. I am a king. I was born to be king. I came to bear witness of the truth, connected with my kingdom that is coming. And we begin to realize that here's Pilate. He's concerned with these things. But what we see in his relationship with Pilate is that in verse 36, leading up to this confession of who he is, Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight, and I would be not delivered to the Jews. What is he saying? I have a spiritual kingdom that I'm a king of. I'm not in competition with Caesar. I'm not in competition with your arrangement of government, Pilate. I have a spiritual kingdom, and if it were not that way, we'd fight. So I would not be delivered up to you. I'm not a rival to you. But at the same time, he does not fear Pilate. Because look at verse 10 and 11. Pilate therefore said unto, speakest thou not unto me? When they're making charges, and he's speaking, but at this time, he's not speaking back. When they're making these charges. Knowest thou not I have the power to release thee, and have the power to crucify thee? Jesus doesn't fear him. Jesus says, if thou wouldest have no, he answered him that thou wouldest have no power against me, except it were given thee from above. Therefore he that delivered me unto thee, hath greater sin. And your sin's greater than others? He says greater. He's not letting Pilate off the hook, is he? Pilate will deliver him up to be crucified. Pilate will deliver him up to be put to death when he realized there is no guilty facts in order to show that he is guilty and worthy of death. But he has it done anyway. He has sinned. He'll answer before the Lord. And what an interesting way when we find in John 19, he's up on the judgment seat of Pilate as he's delivered over to be crucified. To think one day that Pilate will be before the judgment seat of Christ to receive eternal judgment. And on this occasion, Jesus is before him. And Jesus says, you will not have any power to be against me if it were not given thee from above. So when you put someone in the hands of one that has that kind of power, you have greater responsibility. That's what he means by greater sin. You're going to be, that could be Judas, that could be Caiaphas. Because Pilate, you wouldn't have any problem with me. You wouldn't have an issue with me if I hadn't been delivered up in your hands. So he that delivered thee up has greater sin. has greater responsibility for his sin. And the greater is because, Pilate, you do have that, but you don't have it unless it came from God above. God is in control of this circus called trials. And Jesus is standing before him. And Pilate hears about the occasion of them being from Galilee, and he turns him over to Herod. So if we make a chart of the trials of Jesus, we see these events are the question by Annas. He's interrogated and convicted by Caiaphas, and he's mocked. He's mocked as a king. And Matthew, Mark, and Luke speak about that. He's formally, when it gets to be boarding, we want to do everything legally, don't we, in the Sanhedrin? Want to be looking good that we've done everything by the book. They convicted him. They determined to have counsel against him. And Matthew and Mark and Luke speak to that. Pilate hears the accusations and questions Jesus. And we see that in Matthew and Mark and Luke and John at different phases. He is indeed examined by Herod, and he's mocked. He's mocked by the soldiers connected with Pilate. He is mocked and beaten by their hands by those of the Sanhedrin. He's mocked by those that are connected with the soldiers with Herod, mocking him as a king. Slap him in the head. Tell us who hit thee. Prophesy. Put purple upon him after he's scourged. And mock him. They just didn't want to crucify him. They want to diminish him in front of the people. That's how much hatred. Matthew tells us that Pilate knew is out of envy they had delivered Jesus up. Not for any reason for him to be truly put to death. But Pilate finally questions him and sentences him to death by crucifixion. 6 trials under the heading of the trial of Jesus. And we put all those passages together, we learn he was examining him without a charge against him. No charges. False witnesses, misrepresentation of his statements. And that's the Jewish side of it. We know from the Sanhedrin, the ultimate Jewish, they were desiring death and they were seeking a crime. Find something. And then when it gets with Pilate, Pilate is constantly trying to release him. You'll notice in John the 19th chapter, Pilate therefore took Jesus and scourged him, but Pilate's not finished with him. Scourging was usually reserved to hasten the death of those who are going to be crucified. And sometimes scourging, they would not survive to be put on a cross and crucified. But Pilate has scourged him, and then he still wants to release him. He's not going to be put to death by scourging. Pilate still wants to release him. And what he does, the soldiers, when they scourge him, in verse 2, the soldiers placed a crown of thorns and put it on his head and arrayed him in purple garment. And they came unto him and said, Hail, King of the Jews! And they struck him with their hands. And Pilate went out again and said to him, Behold, I bring you out to you, that you may know that I find no crime in him. Behold the man. Look at him. It's as if Pilate was appealing to maybe their sympathy. I diminished him. Here's your man. Here's your king. He still wants to release him. Verse 12, upon this Pilate sought to release him, But the Jews said, if you release Jesus, you're not Caesar's friend. And the pressure is on him. But he wants him to be released. You look at all 6 aspects of his trial with these different individuals. Herod found no crime in him. Pilate found no crime in him. But the pressure is put on weak Pilate. He's going to deliver him up to be crucified. But he's tried every way he can. Scourging. Make him a bloody mess. And they still want him crucified. And it happens. I can see that happening to you and me as nobodies, and nobody knows us, and that happens behind the scenes, and nobody cares. This is the Son of God. And it happens to him. And what I want us to see is something we can learn from this. When we read Ecclesiastes, the 3rd chapter, there's a time to be silent and there's a time to speak. Do you know how to do that? That's a judgment call. But that's mean you got control of yourself. And there are times when you need to speak, there's times they're not. But it's not from a selfish point of view. But it's amazing when Jesus is under such trial as this, so-called trial, and we want to do it legally, you know, that he would speak and he would be silent. And what we see is that he will speak to things that are important and true and necessary. He's doing some teaching. He already knows the outcome of the trial. He's willing to go through that. But in the midst of that, he's able to discern the occasion and to realize what would I like them to hear? What do they need to know? And Jesus will speak even with an oath when he swears who he is. He will speak, I am the Christ. Are you the Son of God? I adjure you, I am the Son of God. You speak well. Are you a king? We just saw, I am a king. I was born to be king, and I came to this earth to be king. And those who are the truth, they follow me. Bold times. He wasn't afraid to speak and declaring what is eternally true and what people need to know to be saved. Not to win an argument. They misrepresented my words. Those are false witnesses. They don't agree. You notice that? We don't care. He said, I am the Christ. I am the Son of God. I'm the King. You take all 6 and he will make that ring from his own voice, from his own heart. Why? Because those are truths that man needs to know. And I will speak on those occasions. He would speak when he wants to know where the other person's coming from. He did it with Pilate. Let's pick up before verse 37. Are you a king then? And Jesus said, yeah. Came to this earth and all this. But look when he speaks. So when he does speak, it becomes something that, hey, I want to listen to him, because he doesn't speak all the time. And in verse 33, Pilate therefore entered again into the praetorium and called Jesus and said to him, art thou the king of the Jews? What did Jesus do? Or sorry, he says, I'm a king. But what does he say here before leading up to that? Jesus answered, says, in fact, do you say this of yourself, or did others tell this concerning me? Where are you coming from, Pilate? Are you coming from Pilate, a Gentile, He said, am I a Jew? I answered it. He's coming from Pilate, a Gentile, a political placement. And he wants to have good relationship with Rome and Caesar. And that's why Jesus answers the way he does. He is the King of the Jews. But Pilate, are you saying this from yourself? He said, I'm not a Jew. He said it from himself. And so what does Jesus then speak? He said, thine own nation, Pilate says, and the chief priests delivered thee up, and what hast thou done? And Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. What have you done? He's not going to answer that. What good does it do? But I tell you what Pilate needed to understand, and what Jesus was not afraid to say it in John 18. I tell you, you would have power to do anything against me if it weren't given you from God. Pilate needed to hear that. Jesus is not afraid of him. You're not afraid of anything that's happened to him. That's already been determined. He said, what did they need to know? Jesus did that under trial. Do you? Can I do that? I want to. I want to follow that type of example. My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, we'd fight. But my kingdom is not from hence. And what is so interesting, when it leads up, when Jesus answers him of the fact you wouldn't have the power, he said, from whence art thou? He just told him, my kingdom is not of this world. And Pilate is struggling. And Jesus lets him struggle with his own conscience, with the weakness of his character. But he took time to know where Pilate was coming from. Can you do that under pressure? Can you do that under pressure? That's when Jesus would speak. Not in hatred, not reviling. There's a time to speak and a time to be silent. He is silent when hearts are closed and when justifying self would be fruitless. That's what I gather from all these passages. In John 19 and verse 9, but Jesus answered him nothing. He came to the praetorian and said, whence art thou? But Jesus gave him no answer. What good is it to tell him again? It wouldn't be. So he doesn't speak. And yet he'll speak some more when it's needed to Pilate. In Luke the 22nd chapter, in verse 67, when they were striking him, verse 65, and many other things they spake against him, reviling him. And as soon as it was day, the assembly of the elders and the people were gathered together, both chief priests and scribes, and they led him away into the council, saying, if thou art the Christ, tell us. But he said unto them, if I tell you, ye will not believe. I thought when he says under oath that he is the Christ, he speaks to that fact. But when it came down, when your hearts are closed, when your minds are closed, I'm not going to humor you. He says, if I tell you, you will not believe. And if I ask you, you will not answer. But from henceforth shall the Son of Man be seated at the right hand of the power of God. And they all said, art thou then the Son of God? And he said to them, you say that I am, because I am. I am the Son of God. But he let them know, what good is it going to do for me to try to justify myself? There's a time to speak, and there's a time to be silent. In Matthew the 27th chapter, and verses 12 through 14, this part of Jesus' account, of Matthew's account of the trials of Jesus under these different individuals. Verse 12 says, and when he was accused of the chief priests and elders, he answered nothing. Thus saith Pilate to him, hearest thou not how many things they witness against thee? And he gave him no answer, not even one word. And so much that the governor marveled greatly. Because most men would be speaking and telling all the things that were wrong and trying to justify themselves. When it was fruitless, and was no sense of justifying oneself, Jesus would not speak. Mark 14, verses 57 through 61. We find the things that essentially when he will not speak about things, and when he would. There stood up certain and there bore false witnesses against him, saying, we heard him say, I will destroy this temple that's made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another made without hands. And not even so did their witnesses agree. And the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, answerest thou nothing? What is this that thou witnessest, these witnesses against thee? But he held his peace and answered nothing. Art thou the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus says, I am. Time to speak and time to be silent. I think I would say, you messed up my words. I didn't say I'm going to destroy the temple. I'm not here to destroy these things. I'm talking about my body, not the real temple. I'd have gone into all that and just talk. I'm afraid I would. But Jesus didn't. Why? It doesn't make any difference. And you've got to be able to look beyond that. Because Jesus was on a mission. And this was his time that he had to endure. We think about what he endured on the cross. What did he endure in the trials that he went through with these different authorities? When it was important for men to know things for their salvation in the context of his trial, he spoke. To entertain their accusations and with closed hearts, he did not speak a word. I hope we can have that kind of wisdom. I tell you, this will make your blood boil. And you can deal with pain. But when injustice comes in the way it did, you arrested me? On what charge? And when you're arrested by a bunch of hypocrites, that just hurts. That makes you boil a little bit more. And that happened. We want to do things by the book. We're going to do things by the law. So we'll have to meet in the morning. He'd been before Annas, he'd been before Caiaphas. And all the while the gospel accounts are telling what's happened out there with Peter. And Peter, his closest friend, one of the apostles close to him, is denying him. I don't even know the man. And when Peter denies the third time, Jesus is looking at him in his eyes. Think what he went through. When even your closest companions buckle. At a time when least they could have confessed to I was. They knew me. But the hypocrisy of these Jewish leaders, taking false witnesses, finding any way to get rid of it, because they already determined that. And then to go through mockery, not one time, go through mockery, not twice, go through mockery 3 times as being the king. Dress him in purple. Matthew's account gives him a reed in his right hand. They put purple on him, the idea of royalty. They pressed down a thorn of crown as a crown. I can see a bougainvillea bush wrapped around his head. You want to play with those things, they hurt. They have leaves on them. Just press it down. And blood coming down his forehead, and then Pilate still wanting to release him. Behold the man. Here's your king. We want Barabbas, a murderer. And they released him. And justice, hypocrisy, and going through being mocked. The Son of God who created the universe is being mocked by the mankind that he created. He didn't lose heart, and he didn't lose his temper. Remarkable. I would give up, wouldn't you? Almost. I don't have anybody to appeal to. God, you're allowing it to happen. Yeah, I am. He willed it to happen. And that's the lesson that we need to learn about events, that we might see this is so unjust. As if God doesn't have anything. Why don't God do something about it? God was in the middle of this. Oh, not being unjust, not being sinful. But we find an example in the days of Joseph in Genesis 15, verse 20. When Joseph had gone through his trials, his injustice, and all the difficulties he went through, it came to the day when he is made known by his brothers, and after the events had transpired and they know who he is, they're afraid of him. He's going to get even. And Joseph would say, don't you fear. You meant it for evil. And that's true. They were envious, wanted to get rid of him. They lied to their father about his death. And you meant it for evil against me. But God was able to turn it all around and take your injustice and turn it all around and make good out of it. It doesn't say that. He meant it for good. He meant it for good. Didn't overcome something. He meant it. And we got to get a hold of that. Because sometimes that comes in the form, this is not right, God. This is unjust. I'm being judged by a bunch of hypocrites. Why do you allow the mockery to go in with it as well? See, this was all part of the plan of God. Mark 8 and verse 31, Jesus prophesied what's going to happen to him. He began to teach them, and here's a great verse when you don't have time to go in a lot of detail with someone you're trying to teach the gospel. Mark 8:31 through the render of that chapter is just a great outline to follow if you have a one shot at somebody. He says, and he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders. He was going to be rejected by the elders. He said it would happen that way. So he could take the injustice. He could take the hypocrisy. He could take the mockery. But he's going to be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes. Yeah, the Sanhedrin. And be killed. And after 3 days, rise again. He had the big picture in mind. But it was all part of God's plan. Jesus knew it before he even was arrested. He knew it from the beginning of his ministry. This is why he came. And then after Jesus' resurrection and ascension, the gospel's being preached. In Acts the 2nd chapter and verse 23, when Peter is preaching that gospel sermon and laying out who Jesus of Nazareth and what he has done, he says, him he delivered up by the determinate counsel and foreknowledge of God. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't something that just happened. It wasn't something that God had not foreknown or one that he counseled to happen. He turned it into good. But what it is horrible. The determinate counsel. He could have sent Jesus any time in history. But he's going to be hanging on a tree. He's not going to be killed first and hang on a tree. Roman government at a time, when the fullness of time came, God sent his son. Here's the days of Tiberius Caesar. By the determinate counsel and foreknowledge of God, yea, by the hand of lawless men, hypocrites, yes, full of hypocrisy, yet they're lawless. And by the hands of lawless men, it wouldn't be an accident. It wouldn't be friendly fire, a friendly sword fight. Wouldn't be a heart attack. By the hand of lawless men will crucify and slay. God determined that. And the Bible makes it plain, and when you're praying to God and when they're going through persecution, the disciples are in Acts 4 and verse 27, for of a truth in this city against thy holy servant Jesus, whom thou didst anoint, both Herod and Pontius Pilate and the Gentiles and the peoples of Israel were gathered together to do whatsoever thy hand and thy counsel foreordained to come to pass. He didn't turn something bad into overcoming it and making it good. It was determinate counsel, his foreknowledge. By his hand, this is the way it's going to be. Lawless hands are going to kill my son. And Jesus is going through his trials with that type of composure, because he can rise above it. They're not going to listen for me to try to justify myself. But this is God's way. And sometimes we make God real good and real powerful, and he doesn't want to touch anything that bad happens to us. He's part of it to wake us up, to bring forth a picture here of what injustice was. But his wisdom is far greater. And what Paul says about the wisdom of this world, I think, is worth noting in 1 Corinthians, the 3rd chapter, in verse 19. When he speaks about the wisdom compared to Jesus, compared to God, there's no comparison. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. For it's written, he that taketh the wise in their own craftiness. He did. He took them in their own craftiness because they didn't destroy Jesus. They just brought him a step closer to the resurrection and the whole plan that God has. But I think we, you and me, in times of our trials of injustice, and I'm sure you've gone through times of injustice, when it's just not right, you can't believe what has happened to you, that we can still control our thoughts, and Jesus is a great example. Because in Hebrews 12 and verse 2, we read, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, despising shame, all the shame they want to heap upon him of being crucified and all the mockery. He looked down on that. He didn't succumb to it. Well, he succumbed to what they wanted to do with it, but he doesn't buckle under that. He despises it, rises above it. He endures it. He sat down at the right hand of God. Then notice verse 3. For consider him that hath endured such gainsaying of sinners against himself. We just considered it tonight. What's that all about? That ye wax not weary, fainting in your souls. The decks are stacked. I don't have any power. I'm going to have to go through this injustice. Don't faint in your soul. Wax not weary. Think about what Jesus went through. And God's foreknowledge and counsel in order for us to be saved. God could have picked all sorts of ways for the death of Christ. Maybe an easy death. But he brought him in a time, and I think he wanted to show all the injustice that can be heaped on people, that would cause us to just melt when we see his bloody figure and turn our heads away and in horror. And the crucifixion and all the things that are said about his trials. What it's all about. I can take the injustice from a bunch of hypocrites, and I can take all their mockery, because I know Jesus went through so much more. The Son of God. And God allowed himself to be treated that way. He just amazes me. But I want to learn from Jesus and try to grow and be like him. I want to know when to speak and when to be silent. And a lot of that will be when you're trying to justify yourself, get away from that. What do they need to know involved with their salvation? And the various things, I can take a beating. And you can take beating, you can take pain. But when it comes in the form of injustice and hypocrisy and mockery, That's hard to take. Jesus took it all. He endured it all so that we will not wax weary and faint in our souls when those things happen to us. And let's remember, God sends things that are evil. He allows us to go through them. He brings it upon people because He means it for our good. And He gives permission for the devil to do things that we would call that's evil. That's not right. It's unjust. It's unfair. But we need to see through that, learn the lessons through that, and then while we're going through the trials, be like Jesus. And that's going to take a lot of work, I think, on us. I know with me. But that's what our Lord did. He humbled Himself in that manner. I hope we will become more like Jesus, that we'll be able to develop and be mature Christians and to be able to react in times of our trials, our fiery trials, whatever they may be in life, and to stand up and learn from Jesus. Get the bigger picture in mind. Speak when you need to. Be silent when you're trying to have to justify yourself and they don't want to hear. That's what Jesus did. And let's learn how to do that. And I think that's why we have all of the Gospels dealing with the trials of Jesus. But when you put it together, I think those are lessons that we can learn. This evening, if you're not a child of God, you're not starting to walk with Jesus, look at the man. Behold the man, disgraced with scourging. In reality, He's our Savior. He was raised from the dead. He's in heaven with a glorified body. He's not going to be limping back here with blood on his forehead and his legs are broken and all those things. He's in a glorified state. And when we see Him as He is, we'll be in a glorified state if we remain faithful. But I don't know how much more injustice that could come on your life from a bunch of more hypocritical than the Jews were in that day. I think you can take anything if Jesus could take that and be shining example of a son that belongs to Christ and following Him. So whatever happens in your life, it will not deter you from your walk and your road to heaven. So if you haven't started that road, we're here to assist you. Obey the gospel. If you believe Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, confess that before us, those who are gathered here. We've confessed that, and never we're going to turn back from it. We're determined to keep going, regardless of the persecutions that may come. And we'll help one another. Jesus will help you. As you saw this morning, He's your high priest. He'll help you in time of need. He's worthy to be followed. What an example of a man that's worthy to be your hero. Follow Him while you have the opportunity. Obey Him as we give you the opportunity now, and obey the gospel. Come as we stand and sing.